All right, in this video, we are moving into the dismissive period, which is the period from the 1980s until the early 2000s. As with the previous eras, we're going to begin with our chart, looking at the number of immigrants and their share of the total US population. So we talked about how between the 60s and 80s, the percentage of immigrants as a share of the total US population was relatively small, and the number of immigrants had decreased. We see that as we move into the early 2000s and beyond, the number of immigrants has again increased in the United States, but again, like the share of immigrants in terms of the total U.S. population, it has increased and is getting close to that 15% that we were at when we entered the restrictive era, although not quite there yet. And so, as you might anticipate before even watching this video, although I know you've read about this era already, with this kind of larger percentage of the population being immigrants comes more repressive policies, more fear about what is American, what is the American identity, or what it's perceived to be being displaced. So we see the beginning of the U.S. English movement, which is the modern Americanization movement, but brought back once again. We see the politicization of bilingual education. So where, since bilingual education was very tied to the civil rights era, kind of this move away from bilingual programs and bilingual initiatives. One very strong initiative that began to move across states was the English for the Children initiative, which was led by Ron Unz, who was a California billionaire who made his money in the tech industry and decided he wanted to make English-only programs his legacy. So someone who was not in education, had no experience in education, was not an education researcher, but just decided to wield his power in that way. And so he began these campaigns that they called English for the Children, but really were about eradicating bilingual education for immigrant families, the children of immigrant families and immigrant children. These initiatives were successful in several states. Proposition 227 passed in California in 1998, Proposition 203 in Arizona in 2000, and Question 2 in Massachusetts in 2002. And these policies made it really difficult for states to maintain bilingual programs. That doesn't mean that they all disappeared. Some programs, if they had parents sign a waiver every year, they were able to get their child to be able to stay in a bilingual program. But many programs ended up shutting down completely because of these policies. Ron Unz did take his campaign then to Colorado, where he finally did not get the votes to put it into law, and that's where he stopped. So we can all be grateful that Colorado stopped this initiative that perhaps would have gone beyond into other states as well. But these three states did have these policies on the books for many years after this period. We'll talk about that when we get to the next era. During the dismissive period, we also had the passage of No Child Left Behind, which was passed in 2001. During this, the No Child Left Behind replaced or was the reiteration of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. And so they kept the funding that was part of Title VII, but they discontinued it. So they kind of moved it to Title III. They renamed it the English Language Acquisition, Language Enhancement, and Academic Achievement Act. And the goal really became explicit about attaining English proficiency. So we see this English-only mentality coming into kind of general education policies as well. And as I'm sure many of you are familiar with, if you know anything about NCLB, a big part of this legislation was accountability, largely shown through high-stakes assessments. So it's part of the reason we're in this very assessment-driven era, because schools are needing to prove that they are, that students are achieving academically based on these standardized assessments. One positive of this era, there were some pluralist approaches, such as the Native American Languages Act, which sought to kind of revitalize many of the Native American languages that were that had been eradicated or almost eradicated through boarding schools, through relocating Native American tribes outside of reservations, and the Declaration of Indigenous Language Rights in 2008. So there's been increased attention to heritage language teaching and bringing back languages. And it's unfortunate that we often need to almost eradicate something to see its value and bring it back. But at the very least, there's been a move to strengthen and bring back Indigenous languages. All right, that's it for this one. It was a short one. We'll move into our last era in the next video, but go ahead and take a quick moment to stop and jot anything that surprised you, things you want to remember, anything influencing language education today, and any questions you have.